The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observit enables security teams to detect risky user activity, investigate incidents in minutes, and effectively respond. Get your free trial at observit.com/securityweekly. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies. Protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week, Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW. Security teams need network data to threat hunt and resolve incidents, but find that PCAP is often too much data and NetFlow isn't enough. Corelight was founded by the creators of Zeek, formerly Bro, and its sensors provide just the right amount of data, transforming raw traffic into comprehensive logs, extracted files, and custom insights so analysts can make fast sense of traffic and move the speed of attack. To find out why Corelight is your best next move in security, visit securityweekly.com/Corelight. Live from Las Vegas, we're at Black Hat 2019 recording the second segment here on Enterprise Security Weekly. Of course, Mr. Matt Alderman is here with me. We've got a couple of wonderful additions. One is Lee Neely has joined us. Lee, welcome.
Great to be here.
He made it.
Yes, made it.
This might be the first time we've done a podcast live together in person.
It is absolutely the first time we've done this.
So
I'm
nice
so excited.
to have you.
Yeah, he's always been in via Zoom or Skype and
right?
or PSW, and we've done pre-records, but now he's in studio.
Yeah.
Shell's in studio too. For
It's
anybody.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It is wonderful. Before we introduce our guest, I want to just get through a couple of announcements, which I didn't read in the first one. If you want to watch any of our webcasts, securityweekly.com/webcast, you get one CPE credit from our friends at ISC Squared. If you go back to the on-demand library, securityweekly.com/on-demand, you also get one credit. One credit per webcast. No more, no less. One credit per webcast. So go do that. If you'd like to, now we were booked almost, I think we had only one slot we might not have sold on Paul's Security Weekly. But every single other slot, 28 or 30 or
28 micros and 5 of 6 segments on 2 shows.
Is what we sold here at Black Hat. If you want to get in on that for our next conference, which might be Hacker Halted, could be RSA, if you want to do a briefing with us, if you want to engage with us to do any kind of activities to help promote your security company, securityweekly.com/booking. Is that good? Did I do enough announcements? Okay.
Yeah, I think you did.
Okay, good. Joe Gillespie, did I say that right?
Close enough.
Okay. He's the regional sales manager for Netsparker, who is sponsoring this segment. Joe, welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
And a great sponsor.
Oh, Netsparker's been with us for so long.
Long time, yeah.
Many of your employees have been on the show
Right.
and just done a wonderful job. Our audience loves the content. In fact, one of my favorite technical segments comes from one of your engineers. Oh, my God. Sven.
Yeah.
He
does a great job, doesn't
PHP type juggling. In fact, if you go to DEF CON and you pick up one of those thumb drives,
Right.
there is a video version of that technical segment on that thumb drive because it's one of my favorites.
Yeah, Sven's good.
He's awesome.
He knows his stuff.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Knows his
Very
stuff.
Joe, how did you get into the security industry?
Kind of a fluke, I'll guess a little bit. I sold a technology consulting company I had a few years ago and was trying to figure out, what am I going to do?
What are
What's
you going to do when
next?
you grow up?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I've got to do something, and ended up talking to Faru and made a connection. They were looking for someone in the sales side, Netsparker, and this was 3.5 years ago. So really ramping up at that point from a product standpoint. So brought me on board, and I've been there for 3.5 years now.
Joe, where are you from?
Originally Little Rock, Arkansas, but I'm in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida now.
Gotcha.
So I kind of moved down to the beach.
You weren't a Walmart guy, were you?
No.
Okay.
No.
You were Bentonville. You were Little Rock, right?
I was a little, yeah, not a Walmart guy.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Walmart people there.
Oh
though,
yeah,
But if you go to
It's huge.
go to Walmart, right? You got to fly into Little Rock.
Walmart headquarters.
Yeah, Bentonville. Yeah, and Little Rock, 10 gates maybe. It's a pretty small
maybe,
airport,
yeah,
right?
maybe.
I think it's like 10
Now,
gates.
see, they've got a regional in Bentonville now. You
Oh,
can go
do
fly-
they?
Yeah, yeah.
See, you used
Walmart,
to have to fly,
yeah, Little Rock
you
and
used to have to
drive.
fly into Little Rock, and then you would drive in the back countries of Arkansas to get to Bentonville, to get to the Walmart headquarters.
It's like in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas. basically,
Yeah, I mean,
right?
although
Yeah.
now it's grown, it's like crazy how much.
It's huge.
It's like,
Johnny Long, a good friend, Hackers for Charity, right? He lives there. That's where he moved.
Okay, yeah.
Because he said there's so much infrastructure there because of Walmart.
it's,
Yeah.
it's crazy.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, it's crazy.
and
how
some
big it is.
awesome
Doing some
golf
amazing
courses and
shit.
some other stuff. I'm
Oh,
telling
yeah,
you. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Joe, basically, we wanted to start talking about vulnerability management as it applies to web application testing. Matt and I both,
near and dear to our hearts.
Near and dear to our hearts. What challenges do you find that customers are bringing to you in the vulnerability management realm?
And I think Farouk has talked about this some, is, we talk about the fact that scanning a lot of vulnerabilities is easy. We can scan a lot of assets. You get a lot of results, but what do you do with those results, and how do you manage those results after you have them? And if you're, if you've 500 assets and you've got 10, 15, 20 vulnerabilities for everyone, how do you manage that volume in an appropriate manner? And
I don't just take the 300-page report and hand it to the IT
Exactly,
guys and go, hey, go fix
go have
this.
fun with this.
Yeah, hitting kills together, they'll fix it.
And so you have that issue, and then you've got that issue of, with all of this, what I see all the time is that the team that's managing that is usually pretty small.
Yeah.
I ran across one recently, a client that 700 applications they were managing, one person.
Wow, how do you do that?
Yeah, how do you
that was
do
my
that?
question.
Yeah.
And so managing that volume of vulnerabilities and all the things that you need to take care of. How do you get them fixed? Who needs to be responsible? How do you do all that stuff? That's what we try to is focus on, getting people to understand. It's everybody can scan. Not everybody lets you manage those vulnerabilities
Right.
well.
And I think this is a core differentiation of vulnerability assessment, which is scanning for vulnerabilities, generating a report, and saying, okay, here's all your vulnerabilities, versus vulnerability management, which means I have to now manage these vulnerabilities. And it's not about, okay, who can produce the most vulnerabilities? It's how do I prioritize those vulnerabilities? And then how do I do something about it in an effective way to say, look, as IT security, it doesn't matter who you are. You only have so many resources, and you can only do so many things on a given day. How do you hand them the 10 most critical things that they need to do today to make their environment more secure? That's the difference between vulnerability assessment and vulnerability management.
Yeah, and so, we within product, we have issue management, issue tracking, and it's, who needs to get that information, and how do you get that information to them in an automated fashion, so there's not some person sitting there having to do, okay, this one needs to go here, and this one needs to go to this one at a time, and how do you automate those processes?
Yeah.
Joe, how do people integrate that with their own ticketing systems? I'm sure that's a common question that you get. What are some examples of that?
Well, I mean, within most cases, it's we have a vulnerability you find, and then you send it out to that ticketing system, whether it's Jira, whatever the case may be.
So you do have integrations.
Yeah, so we have integrations.
I'm trying to be coy. I've used your internal issue.
Yeah.
It's very, and I have to say, like, full disclosure, it's very good. I've used Netsparker, scanned our applications, used the issue tracking, and it does that thing where I can tell it, like, hey, I fixed this issue. It'll automatically go out and scan just for that issue and then update the status of the ticket, and then I can rerun just that to make sure that that issue is always closed. So
what's nice is now, even that, it used to be just we send the information over to Jira, and then someone goes into Jira and fixes that issue. They mark it as fixed, do whatever they need to do with it.
So externally, you can do that too.
Yeah. Okay. So the process then was if someone has to go, okay, well, tell Netsparker now that it's fixed. Someone's got to go in there and say, okay, we fixed that issue.
Yeah.
Well, now with the integrations, they're actually two-way synchronizations. So someone's in Jira,
It's an
they open it up,
differentiator.
they click they say
Yes.
fix. Well, what happens is it actually comes back into the tool and says you're fixed, launches the retest automatically, and then if it's not fixed, it updates not only Netsparker but Jira. So it's once again, it's going back to managing that vulnerability, is that process of how do we take steps out of it for the person managing it so that they can, once again, automate and get as much done as possible within the length of time they have.
What Joe just described is an example of a highly functional and useful integration.
Yes. Right.
And it's so hard
and
to...
it's a bi-directional
yes,
integration.
it's so hard to understand that and get that in our industry, but it's so important because a lot of vendors will say, yeah, we integrate with X, Y, or Z. But what Joe was described is a full picture
It's
integration.
That closed loop integration.
I'd say a lot of those integrations, they just throw it over the fence.
Exactly.
True. And I mean, if you go back to the days Paul and I were at Tenable and you go out and talk to customers, they wanted the closed loop process, right? I find a vulnerability, you open a ticket gets closed, then they want the tool to rescan and verify that the patch or the fix has been applied and that the vulnerability is gone, right? That's a simple closed loop process.
It is.
But you don't get a lot of that in the industry. You get somebody that takes that data, throws it over the fence to another tool, and that tool goes off and does its thing, and then the scan is separate from the closure of the ticket. Right? There's no bi-directional closed loop to say, look, close, now go rescan and verify that the issue's gone. And what we always saw from our customer base back then, and I'm sure you see this too, Joe, is if you just close that loop, it just makes that really nice and tight to say, okay, I fixed it appropriately, it's no longer there.
Right.
And the developer's like, great, I don't get bugged about that anymore.
Right,
I closed the loop. Right.
And if you have a developer who fixes the issue or thinks he has fixed the issue, but
really
it's really not fixed.
Yeah.
Right.
Once again, someone's got to manually go back and deal with that unless that process is automated. So if you automate that process, it's one less thing, and once again allows you to manage more issues as they come up, or work on other things that you need to be working on instead of sitting there tracking all of that.
Well, and if you want that closed loop and your products don't support it, it's a pain in the ass to invent it. I mean, I worked with a team. They spent forever trying to get it the closed loop. And part of the problem was also some of the culture about actually doing that automated closed loop. I was thinking, do you run into culture beyond the technology?
I'm sure, yeah. I mean,
what's your favorite culture stop?
Well, it's like any culture, change is difficult. And if you're not doing it, what are those processes to get it done? And especially if it's a large organization, it's that whole how many steps do we have to go through to get someone to agree that we're going to do this process now?
At least 12.
Well,
at least
from your space, Lee, it's at least your starting point is 12. Right?
Yeah. So there's a lot of inertia.
So that automation of automatically, when a report finishes saying, okay, we found high and critical vulnerabilities, we automatically send them to our issue tracking. And then that process from the issue tracking is, it gets updated there, it updates Netsparker, runs those retests, goes back up, updates everybody. That whole process now can be automated from the time schedule that scan, finish the scan, report's done, tickets go off, everything comes back and flows in. So once again, we go back to that whole process of getting more done in a shorter period of time, allowing you to focus on the really, get rid of that low-hanging fruit and really focus on those other issues that are causing problems.
So how has DevOps changed aspects of what you have to do now? If you think about the way code is developed now. Right. You have these very fast-moving integration deployment pipelines from the DevOps team, right, that are constantly pushing or trying to push multiple releases potentially a day. What does that do now when you think about what Netsparker traditionally has done? See, in the old waterfall, right, you had this big monolithic app. It took months to create and prepare, and then you drop it in, and then you test it, and you go fix some stuff, and it would go back into the waterfall approach. But in DevOps, that cycle has compressed dramatically.
Right. And, the conversations now, every conversation is about, if they're not doing that integration with DevOps, is how do we do that? We need to be doing that. So Yeah, and we had this conversation the other day about it. Is that if they're pushing so many a day, sometimes they'll get ahead of a scanner. I mean, there's no way you can avoid it.
Right.
In some cases, your scanner's sitting there finishing up a scan, and if you've pushed something 2 hours ago, and it's a pretty intense push, and you come back with something right behind it, it may have to wait a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I think that's what any scanner's going to run into that issue, but with DevOps, that integration is part of that whole process of managing those vulnerabilities is critical at this point. Everybody wants to do it now. The question is how many are actually getting it done is always true.
Yeah. What I would say is having developed an application, putting it in the DevOps process slowly over time.
Taking your waterfall approach to DevOps.
Taking my waterfall approach and throwing it out the window, right? In an ideal world, my DevOps process produces an application that the end result, when it's scanned, produces less vulnerabilities. Also, it also incorporates some performance testing, so that scanner can run faster, right, and report those results back to me. With Netsparker, because we have a lot of experience with the product, they're actually real results, right? The false positives are extremely low. If your application's coded correctly, probably none, right? If the conditions are met. And so I think DevOps affords me the luxury of producing good code before it gets to the scanner, right? So I may push 3 releases a day, but only one is going to production to let Netsparker scan it, right? Because my other testing processes should catch those bugs, and
you hope so,
and vulnerabilities. We hope if we're doing DevOps correctly as best we can, right? And I mean, just kind of some math, right? If I'm going to push 3 releases a day, I hope that if there's the first 2 releases, my DevOps processes before it gets to a scanner from external, it's picking up all my bugs and I'm fixing them. At the end of the day, I push release 3. Overnight, Netsparker scans it. They might find one issue that I missed in my process. I go back and fix that the next morning when I get into work. I really think that's how it should work in a DevOps environment, in an ideal world.
In an ideal world,
And some days it may, you're right, the scanner may fall behind, DevOps may fall behind, and we may go back and forth. But tomorrow's a new day, right?
Well, in a perfect world, it would never fall behind. But there's the reality is that sometimes it's going to happen.
But
they're queuing up. But
there's multiple things happening here.
Exactly.
Right? So not only am I making changes to the code, which you are, but you're also getting new vulnerabilities identified potentially in libraries and other things that are going on that are outside of the developer's control, right? And I mean, look, a new vulnerability gets discovered. You may not know from a development perspective that there's a new version because it happens so fast. So you're changing code, but also the environment of identification of new vulnerabilities is happening somewhat outside of your development cycle.
I think your first push into your dev or testing environment should do that integration testing and bring in all the new libraries, right? Like every time I rebuild my containers, I'll pull in all the new libraries from the operating system, very slimmed down if it's in a container, from whatever language, Python, Java, whatever it is.
Flask,
I pull a new, right? Like Equifax to me is the shining example because like I want to, when I push my build for that day, test with the next version of struts, right? And do that integration testing. So the nature of DevOps is to build that environment, fix those vulnerabilities as just a natural process. If Netsparker finds that I got a vulnerable library, my DevOps process is broken, right? Netsparker should be finding those things that I missed in my process, those things that they're fuzzing from external that I just – and the important thing is when an external scanner like Netsparker finds a vulnerability in my app, I should, if you're practicing Agile – I should write the test for that first in my unit tests. So that moving forward, it's looking for that condition across my code base and saying, no, there is a cross-site scripting, SQL inject, some kind of web application attack you've introduced in the app. I tested for that because Netsparker found it. It's a valid finding. Now I test for that before it gets to Netsparker again. Right?
You would hope so, yes.
Again, we're talking utopia.
Well,
this is
So I had another thought. So I like the model. We're testing it as we're iterating and doing all our releases, so now I've got a great presentation to management. What about? But the management is also really totally drunk vats of the cloud Kool-Aid, where all the resource use is paid for. So now aren't we introducing a potential huge uptick in cost having Netsparker going out there and doing all this checking on the environment? Or is it like, because I'm thinking they expect the environment to spin down at night when the users are asleep, as in air quotes, and now I'm going to be scanning it.
A lot of developers that I can answer this, Joe. Sorry, but I've actually just spoken to a developer about this particular issue.
Right.
And what he says is, this is actually Jack's dad. Jack is our 15-year-old intern programmer that works for us, who's awesome.
Who is helping Paul completely re-architect
codes
code.
on a level that I'm like,
he is kicking ass
pretty
and taking
impressive.
names.
Right?
It's crazy. Yeah.
And Dave is Jack's dad, and I was asking him this exact question, Lee, and he said, before we push into things like Fargate in our cloud, we'll do development and testing locally. So these processes happen locally. Right. Once it passes all the because this testing can be CPU, could be bandwidth intensive, could incur cost, right? Running all these processes, we'll test it all locally first. Once it passes all the tests, then you deploy the container up into the cloud.
And the beauty of the containers, we can run them pretty much anywhere. So
not just run them, but spin them up and spin them down.
Yeah, just wherever.
One of the things I loved about containers and DevOps is I could spin up environments, run tests and do stuff, collect the results, tear down that environment, go make changes, and then do it all over again, right? That's one of the huge benefits of this process.
For me, containers are like IT on crack. I mean, it is just so cool.
It's the next level of virtualization on crack, right?
Right.
I mean, think about the day, right, when we went, wait, I have this big old box, but now I can virtualize it.
Yeah.
Now you take that and say, oh, I can take this virtual environment and now containerize it.
Right.
And now you get this just multiplication of what is happening in the industry.
I'm really glad they didn't call that micro-virtualization. Containers is a much better term. I've worked on some big iron and filling it up to use all the CPUs. This is so much easier and so much more agile and it's exciting.
Easier is, I think, up for debate.
Yeah, right.
From the guy who had to build this stuff.
It does introduce some complexity, but I think that the benefits are there for sure, right?
Yeah.
In these environments. But it's interesting, though. I want to make the distinction between applications we're building ourselves, writing the code in-house, versus applications that we're just running, right? Should you interact with customers that are kind of dealing with both? Because it's a different – if I find a vulnerability or Netsparker finds a vulnerability in a third-party app, I can't just – I could go into the code and fix it if it's open source, but there's so many different scenarios that play out.
And it's like – obviously I think with anything, if you're managing a large number of assets, you've got them – if you're smart, you've got them – in our case, we'd tell you to group them. Okay, you're dealing with these here, internal. Here's our external apps. Here's this group of apps. Because everything's got this different, maybe even different classification levels for the vulnerabilities, or maybe they have different needs, different people that need to be involved in the process. So, as part of that, whether it's internal, external, you're going to attack those differently because of. You don't control the source code, basically.
It's a different process.
Yeah, it's a different process.
It could very well be in containers, but I don't control the source code, right?
So if it's that third party, when you're going to go, okay, well, we found this issue. We run into clients that are, they work with outside vendors, but they're connected to those outside vendors.
Yep.
Well, they're scanning that outside vendor's tools or tool sets to make sure that they're secure when they come into their processes, their environment. So
it's a different process, right? Like I would take a new version of an app, I would ideally spin it up in a container, scan it with Netsparker, right? And then based on the findings, that determines whether I upgrade or not. If there's however I want to define it, criticality, number of whatever it is, I can say, look, don't deploy that new version, create tickets, and then go interface with the vendor.
Right. Yeah, because, so much interconnectivity depending on the industry of, we're pulling data from somebody else to do this. We're doing data here. And so they've got to make sure all those vendors' products are secure. So that's a whole different process, obviously, just like you said, between their internal applications that they're running, websites, whatever the case may be.
How do you manage the third-party stuff? I mean, obviously you open a ticket, but that ticket really needs to be with the third-party vendor, right?
You know,
Or is it really up to the organization to really push that fix to the third-party vendor? Because when you look at third-party vendor management in general, you don't have a lot of control over what they're doing.
No. Joe, you need to sell the third-party vendor Netsparker.
There you go.
Right?
There you go. That's one way to approach it. Yeah, you're right. I mean, I think probably everybody handles it a little differently. You know, in some cases, it's I've got clients that actually within our tool give their vendor access to the reports.
Nice.
So they can, from a user's management standpoint, so set up a user for the vendor, give them access to their one asset or 10 assets, whatever that they're interfacing with, so that when they can log in and see the reports that they've run and see the actual vulnerabilities. Once again,
I've done that.
Once again, it's something else you can automate instead of saying, okay, I've run this report for the vendor, and now I've got to go get that to the vendor. They've got to start the process. If they know that they can log in, get that information, and make sure that they're, because they've got a vested interest, obviously, in making sure that their asset is secure.
And you can do that not just with external, but also internal as well. Because, I mean, often, let's say it's open source, right? I'll use, it's kind of a bad, but I'll use WordPress as an example, right? If you're spinning up WordPress instances and
which we do,
Netsparker's finding vulnerabilities, I'm not going to go give the open source or WordPress people, I'm going to give my sysadmin the ticket, because likely that could be a configuration thing. It could be I need to upgrade a plugin, I need to upgrade PHP, need to upgrade WordPress. I need to put some configuration around my WordPress instance to remediate that vulnerability. And the other app could be maybe not open source, and I give the vendor access. What I love about mature applications like Netsparker is I have that role-based access control, and the application lives in the cloud. They're two of my top requirements when I recommend to enterprises. They're like, what should we go buy? I'm like, pretty much like you're going to look at something that's in the cloud, it's SaaS-based, and secondly, a mature product's going to have that role-based access control that you talked about, Joe.
And then the ability to do that notification process also. So vulnerability, scan finishes, who do we need to notify?
The feedback loop.
Just to notify them and say, we found critical vulnerabilities in this particular application or website.
Right.
So that part of that automation process is making sure that the right people get notified, so that if they need to deal with that issue quickly, they have that. They can do that, and then they can log in and go, okay, there it is. I need to go take care of it. Here's the report.
So what happens when you have a set of identified weaknesses in an application, and it's a third party, and they're going to fix it, but they're not going to go 80%. That's good enough. We got 15,000 customers that are happy at this level.
Right.
You can pound sand that you want a higher bar. Can we recast vulnerabilities so that Netsparker doesn't keep telling us about the stuff they're not going to fix? Or
Absolutely.
As much as we'd like them to not tell us to pound sand.
I've done that in the product too.
Yeah, it's a report policy, and you can have as many of those as you want. So you could go in and say, okay, we're going to have a report policy that SQL injections are, low. Which I mean,
probably should be a little crazy.
A silly example,
but it makes the point.
It makes the point. Yeah, you could do that if that's what you choose to do.
And we can focus that just on Joe.com and leave all the other stuff.
Sure.
Yeah,
but the nice part about Netsparker, and something that they you've always talked about, and it's very consistent messaging, is that when you find a vulnerability, you're exploiting it, and there is some artifact. So in Joe's example of SQL injection, when you go to the vendor, if they're like, I don't know if we want to fix that, likely they're not going to say that, because the data from the database, a sample of it, is in the results, is in the report that says, look, I was able to exploit this. By the way, here's a sample of data I was able to obtain from the database. So when the vendor goes, oh, we're not going to fix that. And you're like, but I got access to the database. You should probably fix that, right?
And that's where you cut the vendor off, probably.
But
at least, depending on what your process is, you were asking about what do you do if they only do 80%.
Yeah.
So that, what's your process as an organization if they're not going to, remediate a particular vulnerability or set? Do you cut them off? Where do you go with it? Yeah.
Right. And that's almost moves out of technical into management.
Exactly. Yeah, but it's a challenge, right? Because having grown up in the third-party vendor management space, it is tough to get the business sometimes, and in this case we're talking developers, to find an alternative that is more secure to force them to make that change. That is a risk discussion.
And it's but
right?
one factor in the purchase process.
Yes,
Sure.
it's one factor.
Right.
You know, sometimes I've been lucky, and we've been I worked for an organization where evaluating software that the entire organization is going to use, and I was lucky that they recognize security as like, Paul, you need to like do some basic tests. Like, don't spend like 6 months on each product, but like you got to do some basic tests. Tools like Netsparker are great for this, right? I've got 3 different web apps. I bring them all in. I run the scans against them, and I make my recommendation. And I'm like, look, this one is the poorest out of the 3 security-wise. Like they've got a lot of work to do. In this case, it was for a university. They were using this as their learning management and grade system. This is where the integrity of the app is really important because students, to be quite honest,
Especially new students.
Students would certainly manipulate the system. Students would find vulnerabilities and report them to me, right? And so when I went to the higher management, I'm like, look, you're going to choose the software. I know there's a lot of things that go into it, but look, this is the worst one in the security. Here's the high level, right? You're not going to give them the full results, but here's the high level. Here's the other one that was in the middle, and here's the best one from security. I'm not saying that's the defining factor. Obviously,
It's
from
one
business,
factor.
it's one factor.
It's one factor.
Right.
But
Because in third-party vendor management, you got to look at potentially financial, right? You look at the financials of the of those companies. You look at any other types of risk profiles. Maybe the one that's the worst secured is also the cheapest. And the
Yes.
one that's the most secure is the most expensive. And when you look at your budget, you're weighing all these factors to
I think
decide which way you go.
Also, the vendor's willingness and capabilities to fix those vulnerabilities could play. I mean, if you're looking at spending millions of dollars on software, and look, that vendor comes back and is like, look, yes, we've got a project in place. If they came to me and said, how did you find these? What tool were you using? They would sometimes bring that tool in-house, improve their software. Okay, let's reset the game now, right?
Right.
And then they come back and like maybe they still had vulnerabilities, but they showed a willingness and processes
and they showed
right.
improvement.
Right. And sometimes we would go in if that vendor was the cheapest, right? That's a huge factor, is that financial impact.
Especially in an education environment.
Right.
But
But no matter where, you still got to cross-cut that with what's the data we got out there, what the level of protection is appropriate. I mean, it's very different if you're taking and you're protecting the data that say all of your external public releasable reports versus your grading
You're
system.
absolutely right, Lee, right? Your grade system is very different from another system that your physical security systems carry a certain weight to it, right? Maybe your HVAC systems in a certain building are different from the one that has medical experiments where it could be very costly, right? So the risk is a multiple factors that play into it.
And
Sure.
it makes it all that another order of magnitude harder to talk about or quantify.
It does. Well, risk quantification is a whole different segment.
Another,
Yeah, that's a
Come out of the rabbit hole.
That's a can of worms. We're not going to
Close
go
that
there.
back up.
Right. But the point is valid, right? Is that you have to look at a higher level some of these different variables to say, I want to use this software based on its price, based on its overall security level, and I need an effective way to test it to know what's my security risk, maybe not my financial risk, maybe not other aspects of risk, but it gives me that level of satisfaction.
Exactly.
Do you find that generally your customers have their arms around balancing the risks, or are they a lot of them naive, or and
I think they understand the risk, but once again, I think a lot of times it boils down to resources, time.
Yep.
Totally
I
unique
keep coming
in web
back in my
standards.
mind, Joe, to that one person with 700 apps.
Yeah.
That's a hard problem to
That's
solve.
a hard problem
to
to
solve.
solve.
Even with great tools like Netsparker and support from management, that's still a hard problem to solve.
Challenge. Yeah, it's a challenge.
Well,
we understood the challenge, and we're kind of like, okay, so enterprise product will work. You can do this. You can automate. And when he looked at the product and was like, he was kind of like, yeah, I can see what I can do with that, how much it'll help.
Right.
I still agree with you that that's a lot for one person. Yeah.
They can gain traction, but it's still going to be an uphill battle.
You got to scope it right. I mean, I'm flashing back. We had one of those. I'm in the government space, and we had one of those directives. Thou shalt put secure web servers. Every web server will be secure. And there was a remote management on all the desktops that you had a web listener on that sitting on whatever port port 80, basically.
Right.
And it's like, are we going to put 7,000 security certificates out there? No, we looked at the risk and said, wait a minute, time out. We're declaring this out of scope, and we'll deal with the compliance folks. But this is not where this really is about the services you're providing being secure. Just know, can you imagine taking Netsparker and scanning all 7,000 desktops to see if their web server related?
Actually, it'd probably be pretty good. At that.
I would maybe scan one.
Yeah. You could do it. You could do it, but it's it would. There's a lot of work
but
there.
is that where we want to put our? They take add that to our guy with 750 services.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, right.
It's a resource. You're right, Lee. It's a
resource question at that point. But going back to the question of I think people obviously realize what their risks are and what they're doing, and they're trying to get those issues resolved. And once again, it's time, money, effort. What's there? The good ones are classifying that well and dealing with this level first, this level next.
Right.
Taking care of those issues. But always a challenge, I think.
And what I like about actually scanning the application to understand its security level is I look at that as somewhat independent of other compensating controls, right? We look in a lot of technology we reviewed in the past 2 days is fantastic, but at the end of the day, you've got to improve the resiliency, the security, the reliability of your code, right? Because an attacker somewhere along the line is going to find some kind of way in, and all those compensating controls might be thrown out the window if you haven't actually fixed the application itself.
Right. True.
Right.
I mean, so this is a great question, right? You guys go out, dynamically scan an application. One mitigating control is implementing a web app firewall, right? And so when you see certain activities, maybe a web app firewall rule can mitigate the risk for a period of time, right? And I assume Netsparker has some of those integration points.
Right.
But it's still, at some point, you still have to fix the core issue.
Yeah.
And it's prioritizing that core issue to all the other core issues to say, all right, which one do I gotta go solve first?
Right. Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, remind me of the scenario where we have, do you scan shields up, shields down, or what? Is the application firewall in place? Both, right? And reconcile them.
Well, and I look at this as kind of like a breach and attack simulation that we have today, right? Like, you want to test your application, but you also want to test your defenses, and you want to intermingle them, right?
Yeah.
You want to run these scans with all the protections on. You want to run these scans with all the protections off. Maybe you want to have like a staged approach where you scan with everything off, and then, all right, this one compensating control, going to turn that on, run the scan. You're not really, you're testing your app, but you're more testing that compensating control.
Right.
And I've always advised enterprises to have a structure to make sure that you're testing the application, your processes, and all of your compensating controls and managing that as one kind of global process.
Right. Makes sense. I mean, the volume of applications and web assets that people have now. I mean, we run into companies that will, not necessarily a huge company, but they'll have hundreds of these, hundreds. And just managing that level. And then what's funny is you'll turn around and the team that's managing that, there's 3 people. And you're going, okay. And so I run all the time. I'm look and go, y'all that's a huge task. And so once again, we started this conversation, and then one of the things that we keep talking about is how do you manage all of that? And that's the things that we've put into Netsparker to try to make that easier for them to do, is automate as much as you can. Quality scan. Lack of false positives. We go back to that where I don't have to go back and check everything. Here's the proof. We've shown you that we've been able to exploit the vulnerability.
Right.
Can't be a false positive. You just need to fix it. Don't worry about checking it. You just need to go fix it. So that's an automation. So the integration with the issue tracking is an automation. The automated retesting. So it's just automatically done, and you know if it's fixed or not. If it's not, then you go back and check it again. So all of those features, whether it's automating notifications and workflows and that part of the process is going to that, how do we manage that huge amount of data that they're seeing and that huge amount of vulnerabilities?
Yeah.
So
are there new announcements or
updates from
Netsparker, for Black Hat?
Nothing in the last couple months other than, we've added discovery feature into the tool for end of the year, first of the year, which we had a ton of feedback and requests for. So basically the tool now, you can go in and set your settings and, domain, IP address range, second level domains, organizational name, and the product actually goes and looks at the existing assets you've already set up to be scanned, takes a little look at the settings that you've set up within the discovery, and looks for assets that should be yours.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Discovering assets, web assets.
Yeah.
Brings back a list.
It's a huge problem.
Brings back a list all the time. And people come to us, how many websites, applications do you have?
Yeah. I don't know.
About this many.
Oh, we got about 5.
Yes.
No, you've got like 50.
And so the tool just sits there and constantly monitors that with settings. And if something new pops up, it's there. And you can go through and you look at the list and you say, hey, well, these we don't care about or we don't need, and we just ignore them and then it forgets about them. You see something that you need to be securing that you're not and didn't know is there, whatever the case may be, click on a button, it automates the process of just setting it up to scan. You're ready to go. So Discovery has been a big add, and in the sense that it's, some companies look at it and go, absolutely sure we're securing everything, very confident about it, but this validates what I'm telling management.
Right.
When we run that Discovery, we don't find anything that we shouldn't be seeing.
Right.
So Discovery has been nice. Yeah.
You can't scan what you don't know about.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, you can't
And
protect
that feature
what you
is
don't know.
addressed-
You can't protect what you don't know
You
about.
can't protect what you don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
And Discovery, I think the visibility challenge in application space has been difficult and is only getting more difficult. Because if you think about, again, you've got your security team over here, you got your DevOps team over here, and these guys are out developing new applications to drive the business.
Right.
And if they don't tell security, because they're out, they're like, look, I just got to get this thing out. That lack of visibility is a gaping hole from a protection standpoint. And the ability to discover those and identify those is part of the battle that has to be done.
Well, I mean, when it's how easy is it to publish a website? I mean, or publish an application. I mean, somebody in the marketing department on the other side of the country in an office can, next thing you know, spit them an asset and it's sitting there in security, and they don't tell anybody. Security knows nothing about it.
Right.
And it could just be this wide open hole for
It's as easy as a few clicks and a few lines of code, and I've got a totally new website, new app, new instance of my app, new train of code. Like, that's the world we live in today.
I had a client call me with this issue of, I've got, someone's scanning something. I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
And when they finally got to looking around, it was somebody in one of their departments. They had no clue that the product was even there. They had no clue what was going on. And we're just, So once again, it's pretty easy to do. So Discovery's a nice feature. It's built into the product. It's no additional cost. It just comes with it, and it just allows you to.
I had a very successful pen test once, and basically the mistake that they made was lack of visibility. That marketing had spun up a WordPress site, and we had just used that to gain as much as we could and persisted in the environment, all based on a web application. They had no idea. IT and security had no idea it was there.
So I got to ask the stupid question. Okay, now I'm out. My Netsparker discovering all my web applications out there. Is it just reporting, I found a web app, or is it actually then going to turn around and do a scan on it as well?
Not automatically. You have to set, basically tell it to add that.
We might want to look deeper at this kind of thing.
Right. Yeah, it's the idea of here's the list, because it's going to occasionally bring back an asset that's not something. It's not yours. Yeah, it's not yours, or it looks at that information. It's because we're pulling that information from outside sources. Things going. Okay, so you may occasionally something that's not critical or doesn't matter, or not even yours.
More cautious approach. You can get in some serious kimchi if you don't. Have permission.
That's true.
Right.
So and don't go scanning somebody else's app.
No. That's it's funny how.
I mean, we had some self-service scanning stuff, and there was one IT manager who loved to scan anything that comes, but he was crappy at setting the scope right.
Yeah.
We had some education to do and some permission management to do as well.
Yeah. Yes.
We're also rolling out Linux version of the product in the fourth quarter.
Interesting. So. The
deploy in
full
Linux?
client?
Yeah. For the full product, you'll be able to do a full Linux
you have
deployment.
the cloud app, but you also have the Windows full desktop.
Yeah, and the full. Well, you can also do a full on-premise install of the enterprise tool in a Windows environment.
Yeah.
So now you'll be able to do that in a Linux environment.
Oh, sweet.
So which Paul needs because he's all Linux.
I am all Linux. Yep.
He's a Linux.
A lot of demand for that also. So that's rolling out sometime in the fourth quarter. And
and I think we're going to see more Linux because of containerization, and a lot of that linked to Linux-based environments. So that makes
that'll be cool in the fourth quarter coming out. And then next year, I don't have the roadmap in front of me, but it's crazy some of the stuff that's going to happen next year. The product's just going to continue to expand.
We cannot wait, Joe.
It's going to be fun.
Awesome.
Be
Joe,
awesome.
thank you so much for appearing on
Thanks for
Enterprise
having
Security
me.
Weekly.
It's been fun.
You can go to securityweekly.com/Netsparker to learn more. With that, take a short break and come back. Stay tuned.